I have no option but to stay strong.
This should never have happened there.
Children are dying of COVID.
Welcome to Your World by Bloomberg QuickTake. I'm Jennifer in New York.
And I'm Kurumi in Tokyo.
Seaside towns across the Northern Hemisphere have lost most of their seasonal income due to COVID-19.
Like in Skegness on England's Lincolnshire coast of the North Sea, where we start this week's show.
We hold the country's largest collection of tigers here, and they cost, on average, about £45,000 per year just to feed. I have no option but to stay strong. Inside, I think my nerves are like celery tops. I'm quite frightened about what's happening. Skegness has been a traditional seaside town now for many, many years. It's a very strange place. It's a lovely little seaside place, but in the winter, I think there's about 20,000 people in the entire town. However, at this time of year, there could be 1 million people. The economy rockets. They literally earn 52 weeks' money in probably about 12 weeks. It means a lot to us to have those people coming to Skegness. And as we've grown into probably the largest animal park in Lincolnshire now, we mean a lot to Skegness too. None of us actually said that this is going to happen. We are going to close, but it happened. And 17 weeks later, we are still struggling for finances. We just didn't think it would stop. Literally from that day, the money starts going out. There's nothing coming in. Up to now, we've received £25,000 that they gave to all business ratepayers. But other than that, we haven't received one penny yet. We're here to actually help unwanted animals. We hold a zoo license, so we're exactly the same as the large collections like Chester Zoo or London Zoo. But we are an actual sanctuary, so 99.9% of our animals actually come from the general public for long-term assistance, rehabilitation. We are literally here to look after animals. We're just very lucky that these guys really appreciate what we've done for them. So, because all of our money comes through the door, the instant that stops, you start seeing the bank account just go down and down. Every penny we spend here is, as a non-profit making organisation, is spent on our objectives, and it literally comes through public donations. We don't want profits, we don't want to be development funds, and we don't want that kind of money. We just need survival money. Scar's going out. Oh, is it? Not having people walk around is strange. It really is strange, because those noises and screaming children that we hear playing on the play area is what feeds our animals. We have 30 members of staff on average here. That means I've got 30 families responsibility for, and I feel quite guilty in the fact that their money could stop at any time.
We're never going to get back what we've lost, but we just need to get back as much as we can. Same with everyone in the town, it's more survival. If there's a second wave, I see a lot of businesses going, to be honest. Usually you've got a big queue through the middle. There is a small queue there now. Like I say, with us having no day trippers, everyone's taking a hit. That's why we've got to take what we can.
99% of us are seasonal. This is nothing compared to what we're used to.
That's a knock-on effect for everyone. I think we're going to feel the worst of this for the next couple of years, I think, personally. You've always got to think positive. I mean, no point being down in the dumps all the time, you depress yourself. So, it might be okay.
So I'm the eternal optimist, and I believe that if we can get through this, and this is genuine, we have to work through it. Sat at home and worrying isn't going to do any good for me. I don't think it does any good for anyone.
As Americans were fighting for equality here in the States during the civil rights era, there was a growing campaign in Bristol, England, calling for equality for bus drivers. We caught up with the son of the first Black bus driver in Bristol as he reflected on how his father's courage helped lead to change.
I was very proud to be the son of the very first Black bus driver of Bristol. My father's name was Norman Samuels, and he came over to the UK, and Bristol specifically, in 1960. The 1963 time, a story made it into the media of a chap called Guy Reed Bailey, who'd applied to the Bristol Omnibus Company, I believe it was called then. They were advertising for conductors and people to work on the buses. So he decided that he wanted to apply for a job and sent his application in. His name didn't sound particularly black, so he was given an interview date, to which he turned up. And to his surprise, when he arrived, he found that the job vacancy was already filled. And then it turned out, legally at that time, the bus company was allowed to discriminate on the basis of colour. And so my father said, what can I do? He didn't feel that he wanted to go out and be such an agitator like Paul Stevenson. But what he did feel he could do was to apply for a job. And so when the opportunity came up in 1963, I think the famous date was August 28th.
To end the long night of their captivity.
When the famous speech, I Have a Dream in America, happened by Martin Luther King Jr., the bus company in Bristol relented and said, we will now allow, not because of the kindness of their heart, but because of the political pressure that was there, they said, we will now allow Black people to apply for jobs. And at that point, my father decided that he was going to apply to work on the buses. And he said the day he took his test, people were lining the streets to see him behind the wheel of a Bristol bus because they couldn't quite believe that a Black man would actually be on a bus driving behind the wheel. His, if you like, his active resistance against racism was to do something from his point of view very pragmatic, and that was to prove that he was just as capable as the next person of being proficient and professional enough to actually qualify and drive a bus. The date that he became a bus driver on the 15th of October 1964, it was the day I was born.
I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama with its vicious racists.
And I think that when Dr. Martin Luther King had that famous I Have a Dream speech, when he talked about his children being judged by the content of their character rather than the colour of their skin, I think it had a lot of resonance with Black people here who wanted to be recognised for their abilities rather than their skin colour being the differentiating factor as to whether or not they were even allowed to be treated equally. With the situation with George Floyd, the news reverberated around the world as to the injustice that happened where this man's life was taken. And I think that created a backdrop here in Britain to say this should never have happened there. And in reality, we still have racism that goes on here. So it fueled, I think, a lot more introspection and discussion and debate as to how equal are we now after all these years have gone, after these decades have gone. In Bristol for a number of years, there had been lots of discussions, lots of debates as to what this figure Edward Colston represented. On the one hand, he was kind of revered as a philanthropist and doing lots of things for Bristol, but the reality was underneath that, the wealth, where the wealth came from, the slave trade, was something that was quite abhorrent. I wasn't surprised that the statue was toppled because of what it represented. And whilst we encountered racism, and we still do to this day, where people either overtly or covertly kind of give you the indication that you don't belong here, I feel very much a native son of Bristol. Yes, I have a history that goes through the Caribbean and further back to Africa, but I'm a Bristolian and I'm British, and I don't shirk from that. And one of the things that I think my father always said to me that I always take into heart is, he said, whatever you do, just make sure you do it with with passion and with excellence. It's probably my paraphrase. And when I had the awesome privilege of representing Great Britain at the Olympic Games, I was very proud of that because I felt that I was representing Britain, an aspect of Britain, the black people where I'm from, as much as the wider society.
11 bullets being unloaded on someone that I knew, that I saw in our community, that never bothered, to my knowledge, anybody. You know, I would see him and he would go about his business. To see that happen last night was devastating.
The FDA's surprise decision to issue an emergency use authorization for convalescent plasma as a COVID-19 treatment has put renewed attention on the process of giving plasma. I spoke with Dr. William Schaffner to learn more. Let's just start by going over the news. What did President Trump announce today, and what do we know about convalescent plasma treatments?
When people are infected, the body fights off the infection and we recover. As a part of that process, the body makes proteins that circulate in the blood. Those are called antibodies. Those are the proteins that fight off the virus. And so the notion is that could we harvest that plasma? That's the yellow part, the liquid part of the blood. Could we harvest that and actually use it to treat people who are sick? The only way to really know that, of course, is if you do a controlled trial. You alternate patients, some get the plasma, some get a placebo, and then we watch how the illness progresses and we compare the treatment arm with the untreated arm. We've already managed to treat about 70,000 plus patients. Question still comes back. How effective is it? When do you give it in the course of the illness for maximum effect, if there is one? And how many doses do you have to give? Those nuances are still not known.
We heard Dr. Fauci pushing back against the emergency use authorization last week, which is pretty recent. So what would you say to folks who are concerned about a treatment like this?
Well, as I said, we have used plasma treatment for any number of other illnesses, not all infectious diseases. We give plasma therapy all the time in our medical center. So there are adverse events. We know how to manage them. So from my point of view, the safety issue is very small with this treatment. The big issue, and I think the reason Dr. Fauci was cautious, is we don't really know that it will work. And we need more rigorous data to show that it works. My notion is that we have kind of a grade C data to show that it will work. Getting the grade A data is going to be harder now because with this emergency use authorization, lots of people will be wanting it and it will be much more difficult to recruit the patients into the clinical trial. To enter the trial, in effect, you flip a coin and you say, you get the plasma and you don't. So you have to allow chance to determine whether you're getting plasma or not. And here we have the political leadership of the country standing behind and advocating plasma treatment and calling it a breakthrough. I wish that the political leadership had not made this announcement. From my point of view, this announcement should have been done by the professionals, not the politicians. It was said that the decision was vetted by a group of independent scientists within the FDA, but they're not independent. The independent group is outside the FDA. It makes me very concerned about what the process might be when it comes to the evaluation of vaccines. I am concerned again that the full body of data, rigorously examined and vetted by an external group of experts, will be shortcut. response to the virus has been disjointed. It has not had strong federal leadership. It has put the premier public health agency of the world, the CDC, off to the side. It's been led mostly by our political leadership rather than our professional leadership, and we really have not had a coherent, comprehensive national plan that has been clearly communicated. So I think the United States, I'm sorry, gets an F when it comes to the response.
Given what you just talked with us about, should folks trust the president's advice on treatments like this, given the federal response to the pandemic so far?
I always urge people to listen to the public health authorities. There were not much in evidence today, but they are the ones in whom I have the most confidence.
Convalescent plasma is still an experimental therapy. It should be continue to be evaluated in well-designed, randomized clinical trials.
I just think one other point that we'd make with respect to convalescent therapy is, like with all therapies, there can be risks. And so that's another thing that one has to consider. And in the case of convalescent plasma therapies, there are a number of side effects, from relatively mild chills and fevers that can be associated with it to more severe lung-related injuries, even circulatory overload. So for that reason, as Soumya outlined, the clinical trial results are extremely important to know that we've got a clear demonstrated benefit, so that we can weigh both of these in considering the final recommendations.
Conditions in which migrant children are being held in the United States were already under the spotlight before COVID-19. Now a nonprofit is trying to highlight how the pandemic is threatening their safety even more.
Children are dying of COVID. It's not true that every child is either asymptomatic or gets a mild case. It only takes one child to die in detention who doesn't have to be there at all for us to say, how did this happen?
Strict physical distancing is practically impossible in these facilities. I've also learned that they're not regularly following isolation procedures or quarantine measures as dictated by the CDC. So they're cohorting people who have tested positive for COVID with people who may have had exposure but are not themselves symptomatic, are not themselves testing positive for COVID. And so in doing so, you're just allowing COVID to spread.
You're required to give children safe and sanitary conditions. It is not safe and sanitary for children to be in cages, sleeping on concrete, in freezing rooms with the lights on 24 hours a day.
I don't know if it's purposefully, but they're certainly inaccurately testing people. And so the numbers are probably much higher than we would like them to think and then reported anywhere. We have had some ICE patients. So they are being transferred. I don't know if all of the ones who are sick are being provided care, which I fear they are not. I've spoken to a few that tested that were COVID positive. They tell me they were really scared, and then they actually became infected from COVID, and they were very scared that they were going to die. Unfortunately, they did not. These people need to be released. I mean, if they're nonviolent, I advocate for them. They need to be released so we can spare lives.
We are monitoring the conditions of detention to see if the government is complying with the agreement, the Flores Settlement Agreement, that gives them the terms and conditions under which they must detain children and under which they must release children. ICE is never in compliance with what they're supposed to do. And the judge has found ICE not to be compliant with any CDC guideline, masking, social distancing, hand washing, nothing. They're not compliant with anything. And they're required to release children within 20 days out of family detention. And there are kids that have been there a year with their parents. The recent COVID pandemic caused Flores Council to file an enforcement action that says it's dangerous in there for kids. Release kids right now to sponsors and release families right now. And while you're getting that organized, you have to observe CDC guidelines.
These children have done nothing wrong except being born in an unsafe place. And so I strongly believe we should not be a country that detains and punishes families for seeking a new life away from violence and death for their children.
All right, that's our show for this week. Remember to follow Bloomberg QuickTake on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
And for a daily recap of the day's top stories, visit www.quicktake.video. Thanks for watching.